just between us.
If you're looking for a new podcast, might I recommend our podcast?
Hi, I'm Gabe Dunn.
And I'm Allison Raskin. We have a weekly show called Just Between Us, where we explore every kind of topic out there.
From mental health to sexuality to animal behavior to science.
We love to interview fascinating people about their various expertise. We also answer listener questions and play a very silly game called Hypotheticals.
You're not going to want to miss it. It's unhinged.
And if you don't want to trust our word for it because it's our show, you should know that the iHeart Podcast Awards nominated us for Best Ensemble for 2023.
That means that we are good at our jobs.
Or we have good chemistry.
Ooh.
So check out Just Between Us every Wednesday.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something.
Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.
The following podcast includes explicit language, including, well, you'll just have to wait and see.
Hi, I'm Josh Levine, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of July 31st, 2023. On this week's show, the Washington Post's Chuck Culpepper will join us to talk about the latest from the Women's World Cup, including Colombia's big win over Germany and Australia's monster victory over Canada. Alex Kirshner of Slate and the Split Zone Duo podcast will also be here for a couple of segments. First, on whether NFL running backs should stage a mutiny to protest their relatively low wages. And second, at the other end of the pay scale, we'll discuss the Celtics Jaylen Brown getting the biggest deal in NBA history and whether there will ever be a point when athletes make too much money. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm the author of The Queen and the host of the podcast 1 Year. Back with me this week, I'm happy to say, is Stefan Fatsis. He's the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside. How are you, Stefan?
Getting better. Don't get COVID, people. COVID sucks. COVID kicked my ass. I got it in Las Vegas. My fault for going to Las Vegas to play in the North American Scrabble Championships a couple weeks ago.
We'll be hearing more about that, the Scrabble part, not the COVID part, later in the show. But glad you're feeling better.
Thanks.
The Slow Burn live show was great. I say that not to rub it into Stefan, who was not able to be there, but to revel in the glories of our friend Joel Anderson. And in our bonus segment for Slate Plus members this week, if you are a member, you will get to hear Alex Kirshner and us talk about maybe the end of a conference on the West Coast that connects such teams as Oregon, Washington, Stanford. I could name them all, but I won't. With Colorado leaving, what does that mean for the future of the Pac, whatever number it is? And will there cease to be any such conference? Alex will drop some knowledge on us. To hear that, you have to be a Slate Plus member. You get bonus segments on this show and on Slow Burn and on other Slate shows. You also get to listen to us ad-free, unlimited reading on the Slate site, and you get to support us, which we appreciate. Slate.com/hangupplus to sign up. Slate.com/hangupplus.
In Melbourne on Monday evening at the Women's World Cup, Sports Mad Australia got what its stuffed kangaroo-waving fans wanted. The Matildas, as the women's soccer team is known, made defending Olympic champion Canada the first big-name casualty of the tournament with a 4-0 thumping that shockingly sent our neighbors home. Fire up the Whoa Canada headlines. Chuck Culpepper was at the game. Welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for having me. And hello from tomorrow. I'm here to tell you that tomorrow is all right. It's going to be all right.
You have seen some boisterous fans already in this tournament. Brazil and upstart Colombia, to name a couple. But this must have been something. As you wrote like an hour before we are talking to you in your Gamer for the Washington Post, the World Cup party of a host nation corralled the best element a party can take on: sustenance. What was it like at Melbourne Rectangular Stadium, Chuck?
So first off, I walked along the concourse talking to various fans, Australian fans. You know, the more paint you had on you, the more chance you had of me coming up to you to say hello and try to interview. But there was a lot of worry. And I think people had spent the day worrying, maybe a few days worrying, because if you think about it, it's their only World Cup as host for these players are going to have in their careers. You know, very unlikely you'd have two. And, you know, here was this big buildup for it. And the most sports mad country in the world, I think. Can't be sure of that, but I think so. And if they went out before the knockout stage, it was going to be what some of the headlines were calling a disaster. And I talked to one woman who was early on in the administration of women's soccer and sports. She's retired now, but she was there as a fan eating fish and chips, and I happened to run across her, and she said, "I cannot bear to think of the repercussions if we don't go through." So there was a lot of worry. And so what you felt when it all played out was this exhilaration and then some relief, I think.
Well, this was a team that looked incredibly fragile without their star and the face of the World Cup, Sam Kerr, in the opening two games. And yet, in this match, Chuck, if you hadn't known what had happened in the first two games and you hadn't known Canada's history as the most recent Olympic champion, you would have thought that this was one of these games with a soccer power taking on a minnow. I mean, Australia came at them in waves. It was, I think, a tactically pretty brilliant match, but also one where their attacking players just overwhelmed Canada again and again. And you wouldn't have guessed that this was a team that had any issues with scoring or even looking dangerous in the first couple games.
Yeah, that part of it is remarkable because fragile is what they were. That last goal they let in against Nigeria looked just like a case of being under sudden pressure and not being able to cope with it. It is remarkable that they got all the way to the eve of the World Cup, their first match, and then their North Star, you know, this remarkable player who I flew 250,000 miles to see. You know, she was one of the top three things I wanted to see here. And then,
did you go see her in space?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was so far, but as we know, but she, but you know, to have her injured on the eve of this is crazy. So I think part of that, what we're saying here is that in the first two matches, the team had to adjust to that thought. Not only that thought, but sort of the reality of what it is without her. And you know, she's maybe the biggest star of the tournament going in. So that's a lot to adjust to, and it felt like they got there tonight after two matches where they just looked like they were going to go out. They look like they deserve to go out. But tonight they look like they can win the whole thing, especially if she comes back with an intact calf. So.
And she was not a quiet bystander for this match. She seemed to be coaching from the sideline. She was delivering water to teammates. Sam Kerr is a marvel. I mean, she is just a brilliant player. But she said before this game that she was available if needed. And probably to everyone's great relief, she was not needed. Australia wins the group. Nigeria finishes second in the group and moves on. Canada goes home. And to talk about Canada for 1 minute here, I don't think this is a huge surprise. I mean, this team has been fighting with its federation like so many other women's teams have been fighting with their federations in the months leading up to this tournament. Canada and the Federation reached a deal on Friday regarding payment from the World Cup, and they weren't really happy about it either. We've been forced to choose between receiving a fair share of the rewards from our team's successes at the World Cups, meaning the women and men, and our commitment to equal pay and equal treatment.
Yeah, and I think it's not that shocking that they went out. What's jarring as how it looked, because as we were just saying, they were absolutely inconsequential through that thing. Just nothing. They had nothing. They were not a threat at any point. I guess I remember one moment where I thought they might score, but it was exactly what Australia needed too, because they needed to get up early and not have that extra pressure on them, any more pressure on them than they already had. So Canada, of all teams, winner of the last major international tournament, the Olympics, turns out to be exactly what Australia needed to play, and I don't think anybody saw that coming.
It's kind of over-determined in this tournament. If you lose, it can be because you had to travel so far. Every team has devastating injuries. Canada has its share, along with Australia. Every team, it seems like at least a huge number of them are fighting with their federation. So I think if Canada had won, we would have said, look at everything that they overcame. I don't think it actually was fated that this would happen to them. And I thought there was some interesting analysis on the broadcast on Fox. They were talking about how within the Canada kind of camp, they've had this continual success in the Olympics and not in the World Cup. And the kind of internal Canada explanation for that is that they're less deep than some of the other countries, and the Olympic rosters are actually smaller, and the tournament is held over a shorter period of time. So maybe that's to Canada's advantage. So maybe there is just a sort of structural issue that's harmed them at World Cups. But, the issue for them was needing to get a result out of this game. Christine Sinclair misses the penalty against Nigeria. Them not getting a win in that first game is what allowed Nigeria to advance out of the group and what ended up costing Canada. I don't think we necessarily knew that after the first match, but kind of looking back and analyzing it, that's sort of missing that penalty from the greatest goal scorer in the history of the sport is what ultimately cost them in this tournament.
That's a great point, and I hadn't thought of it yet tonight through this whole evening, and it's probably part of what we were talking about, a few of us up and watching the match, which is that Australia its energy was so compelling, and the pressure that was on it was so compelling, and the way it responded to that it almost deluged the whole idea of Canada going out of pre-knockout during the group stage for the first time since 2011. And in that thought, I had not yet thought about that penalty and how, barring that, they'd still be going, I guess. I mean, everything could be different from them, but it is something to look back on that now.
This is shaping up, Chuck, as a World Cup with some potential for surprises. And that could all change once the knockout rounds begin. But already we've seen Jamaica tie France. Spain looked great, and then they lost 4-0 to Japan on Monday to finish second in their group. The U.S. has looked not so impressive in its first two games, a 3-0 win over Vietnam, newcomer to the tournament, and a 1-1 draw with the Netherlands. You could make an argument that the strongest team so far was one you watched a couple of days ago, Colombia, which had an incredible upset of number 2 in the world, Germany. What was that game like?
That was a revelation Colombia-wise, and that's been talked about all day today. I left Sydney and came to Melbourne, and people have been talking about it all day, how just enthralling they were as a team, how they played with this combination of sort of vigor and you would say and organization at the same time. They believed that they belonged in that match with the number 2 team in the world, and they were dynamic. They were the 18-year-old Linda Caicedo with the goal of the tournament so far, and I don't think they're going to win the tournament, but I think they're going to be better than maybe they even thought they would be, because they know now that they belong they can hang with those teams. So, but I think this point about the gap closing has really been reinforced through this tournament. Haiti, with that great showing against England, Jamaica, as you say, Nigeria to some degree, although they've been in all 9 World Cups, but maybe not to this degree of competitiveness. So I think this is really shown in this event is how we haven't had as many of those. I don't know if we've had any of those 8-0 games that used to mark.
13-0 in the case of the U.S. against Thailand.
Thailand, yeah.
Stefan, it's hard to argue with Japan looking at the results and talking about the most impressive teams. But in terms of the most impressive players, Linda Caicedo of Colombia, diagnosed with ovarian cancer at age 15, had surgery and chemotherapy. And you hear that and you're like, wow, that is an incredible story to overcome that. And then I tell you that she's 18 now. So this is not in the distant past where she's had a lot of time to, recover, recuperate, grow up. I mean, this is something that happened 3 years ago. And she's played in the space of a calendar year in a U17, U20, and the full World Cup. Just an incredible story and an incredible player beyond being a story. And, Stefan, if we're kind of zooming out here for a second, we've seen, the first kind of wave in the 1990s, you had countries like the United States due to Title IX and just the sort of values around women playing sports kind of go off to this like huge lead in terms of this sport and interest and investment and quality. And then you've seen the European nations that had a kind of traditionally, I think, misogynistic and chauvinistic attitude around soccer, and places that had invested in their men's team but hadn't in their women's team, but are now catching up. Places like England and Spain, et cetera. But I think the real opportunity to make this more of a global game and to kind of increase the depth and interest is in South America. I mean, Brazil has had great teams. There have been major issues in terms of investment in the country in women's soccer. So there's been a kind of roller coaster there. But you can imagine a universe in which Colombia and Argentina and these sort of traditional power, even countries like, you think of Chile, like places that have had just amazing men's teams, just how wonderful that would be for this tournament. And Colombia is kind of showing the promise of that.
Yeah, they definitely are, Chuck. And I think part of it I've seen people write stories about is that it's just the general development, more girls playing, bubbling up to the national teams, but it's also been the way women athletes are being trained in these countries. More fitness, more stamina, more physicality, playing at a higher motor level. And that has put more pressure on the traditional teams, because as these teams, from what's happened so far in this tournament, as these teams have been fitter and more aggressive and intense, particularly defensively, it has prevented the traditional teams that have just sort of thrown their jerseys on the field and romped to 5 and 6 and 10-0 wins. It's made life much more difficult for them on the defensive end, and that has helped to sort of equalize things a little bit more, and maybe that's what will help lead to some upsets in the knockout rounds.
I think the single most striking thing that I've seen and experienced and heard here is South America. And I think when you one night in a stadium full of Brazilian fans, and the next night in Brisbane, the next night in a stadium in Sydney full of Colombian fans, and I think I might be wrong, but in the way that they respond, in the way that they support these teams, I can actually feel the generational change of kids who have been raised and are now of a certain age, who have been raised with the idea of the female athlete as normal and healthy, which we all believe that it is and want it to be. And so, as you were saying, South America, they've produced only 2 semifinalists in this thing so far, and both were Brazilian teams, I think 03 and 07, I think. And so that's where it's going to come from, is that sort of public, emphasis and demand, and I think and support. And you just hope the people in charge are smart enough to see these crowds and what's out there so far away from these countries.
So looking forward, Chuck, I'm curious where you're going next and what you're looking forward to by the time folks hear this. It's possible or likely that the U.S. will have played its final knockout stage game against Portugal, which is 3 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday here in the U.S. And it's not like the American women are happy with how they've performed so far. You don't get a sense of like complacency. They don't think that they've performed up to snuff. And I do think it's possible that we'll look back in the tournament, and it obviously depends on matchups, but find out that, you know, the U.S. and the Netherlands, who played in the final in 2019, maybe they are two of the 3 or 4 best teams in this tournament. And so there's still obviously time to grow into this tournament. And there's also the opportunity, you know, the slim opportunity, but to get knocked out of the tournament for the U.S. And so just the range of outcomes here is incredibly vast.
The number of teams that could win this thing seems pretty abundant too. It's as wide open as I've seen it be. And so next I'm headed to Adelaide tomorrow to see China play England. And of course, England has big hopes too. And Lauren James, you know, with a goal that is probably the second best goal by a really young person, really young person. She's 21 in this tournament. That was against Denmark on Friday night, I think. And then the next night I'll come back here to Melbourne to see Brazil play Jamaica. And that's going to be really something, I think.
Chuck Culpepper is a sports writer for the Washington Post. Probably one of the most well-traveled sports writers that I know. Chuck, thank you so much for coming on the show, and enjoy the rest of the tournament.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
Up next, we'll talk to Alex Kirshner about the underpaid and unhappy NFL running back.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies, all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the more than 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Over the weekend, Colts owner Jim Irsay declared publicly that the team will not be trading Jonathan Taylor, despite Taylor requesting out of Indianapolis. The standoff between the team and its star running back, who's scheduled to make $4.3 million in the last year of his rookie deal, is just the latest public dispute in what's been an escalating war between the NFL and some of its most famous players, guys who believe they're chronically underpaid as a group and are struggling to figure out what to do about it. Joining us now is Alex Kirshner. He's a contributing writer for Slate and one of the hosts of the immortal college football podcast, Split Zone Duo. They're doing a live show in Minneapolis on Friday, September 1st. You can get tickets at splitzoneduolive.com. And I encourage you to do so because the live show I went to in DC was an incredibly good time. There's even an off-the-record AMA at the end if you want some secret college football dish. Alex, welcome.
Josh, thank you for having me. Excited to talk about the men who tote the mail, but not for the USPS.
Okay, let's start with the Colts, Alex. Reports are that Jonathan Taylor and Jim Irsay met in the owner's luxury bus, which tells you something about the power dynamic here. But anyway, Irsay tweeted, "We have negotiated a CBA, collective bargaining agreement, that took years of effort and hard work and compromise and good faith by both sides to say now that a specific player category, meaning running backs, wants another negotiation after the fact is inappropriate." What do you make of that argument?
I don't know that Jim Irsay is a good messenger for that argument, but I don't know that there's a practical legal labor dynamic leg for NFL running backs to stand on, which sucks. But the reason for that is that the NFL already has a players' union. It's got owners. It's got Roger Goodell representing them. And Irsay's not wrong that they do negotiate a collective bargaining agreement. I think the tragedy of this is that the NFL already has a collectively bargained, at least, but it already has a wage suppression mechanism to hold down player salaries. And what we're talking about with running backs making less than players at other positions isn't exactly that. The NFL pays running backs less because NFL teams have come to a collective conclusion that I think is mostly right, that it's not very good business to pay running backs a lot of money relative to players at other positions. And that sucks because running backs are heroes of this sport. And they are the players who make a lot of kids be interested in football. They're the guys that you watch performing Herculean feats and taking a huge physical beating dozens of times in a game, week in, week out for an entire season. And it sucks that the economics of this sport have worked out the way they have for this position. Yet I also think it's pretty challenging to think of a way to fix it that would ultimately do anything other than detract from players at other positions who are also making significant sacrifices. And that's because of that salary cap, and that's because of the way that the NFL works. So it seems like a fairly intractable problem from where I sit.
Except that the one thing that seems particularly unfair about the way running backs get paid is that the way they are used. And they are used extensively and to their greatest success in the first 3 or 4 years of their career when they're on a rookie contract. So if I'm the union and I care about protecting this position in some way, during the next round of collective bargaining agreements, one emphasis could be to try to amend the rookie contract to build in, maybe not just for the running back position, but for all rookie contracts, some sort of system that makes it possible for these great players or the great players at this position to get paid earlier. Because the lifespan of a running back, the lifespan of all NFL players is short, but the lifespan of a peak running back is really short. It is rarer and rarer that you see running backs go 7, 8, 9, 10 or more years in this league at the sustained level of performance that they produce in the first few years in the NFL.
Yeah, Stefan, you made a really important distinction there. The lifespan of every NFL player is pretty short on average, but the difference with running backs is the lifespan of even excellent running backs is short. And, Dominique Foxworth has mentioned that the only possible solution here within the current kind of confines of the collective bargaining agreement is that there is this pool of money for players who exceed certain performance benchmarks. Like if you get drafted in a late round and you turn out to be great, there is a pool of money that is divided up against these players that sort of outperform their deals or outperform their rookie draft position. And that pool of money, I think there is some discretion there potentially, Alex. Maybe it could be tilted a little bit more towards running backs. Maybe it could be tilted a little bit away from pure snap count evaluations and more towards, things like yards or yards per carry or whatever. But again, like you're saying, in any field like this that's zero sum, where giving to one takes away from another, there's going to be a major push and pull there. And I think there are a bunch of underlying issues, but I think a major one is that it's an obvious point, but you're not in the union until you're in the NFL. And the players who have their rights bargained away are the ones who aren't in the league yet. And that's what it's common in NBA, Major League Baseball, pretty much all sports that have these sorts of systems, that the players who are most underpaid, Alex, and where the teams most extract value are the ones on these rookie deals. That seems like the fundamental issue here, and anything that doesn't address that is just sort of, working around the margins and on the edges and doesn't address what the real challenge is.
Absolutely. And there are some genuinely revolutionary things that could be done in the NFL or any other professional sports league to make it less of a nibbling at the margins and more of a wholesale change. You could abolish the draft. You could, in the NFL's case, get rid of non-guaranteed contracts as the rule of the league. And you could make it so that every contract that an NFL team signs with a player requires money to be fully guaranteed, so that if a running back signs a 5-year contract and then takes an enormous physical toll in the first 3 or 4 years of that 5-year contract, that he can't be cut for, significant savings against the salary cap. Those are big things that a well-organized NFLPA could choose to fight for and go to the mat for and stand on that hill, no matter what the NFL owners said. And obviously the owners would oppose that pretty forcefully. But given what the NFLPA has been and what honestly most pro sports unions have been, you are probably looking at those smaller tweaks that Josh is talking about. And all of this, I think, amounts to trying to make a pretty significant problem for running backs a little bit less bad. And I think Stefan's exactly right that, making the rookie pay scale a bit more generous for the players would be something that seems like it could help running backs in particular. But it's not going to change the fact that as careers go on, NFL teams don't think running backs are a great place to park high dollar investments. And it's just hard to see it changing.
And part of the reason for that, Alex, is the way that the position has evolved in the NFL. You don't have running backs carrying the ball as much as they used to. You don't view the position as the absolute required workhorse of an NFL offense. And the punishment that running backs endure ensures that there's going to be somebody at replacement level or better who is younger coming into the league. So you see things like we saw this week. Sony Michel retires after 5 seasons in the NFL, 2 Super Bowl rings, and just decided that my body says it's time to go. And when the running back's body says it's time to go, more running backs are going to just go. And then you're going to also get situations like Ezekiel Elliott, for years viewed as one of the absolute stars of the NFL, doesn't have a job because his performance has begun to diminish later in his career. But there's also the simple fact of how NFL offenses operate, and the running back is just not the central cog that he once was.
Yeah, and it's even deeper in terms of the schematics of the way that the NFL works nowadays. The nerds, if you will, the analytics-driven number crunchers who help NFL teams make a lot of decisions and who I think are, as a class, a pretty smart group of people, have made a pretty compelling case that having a great running back doesn't do all of the things that truistically it does. It doesn't mean if you have a really strong running back in the backfield that the defense is going to put a bunch of guys in the defensive box close to the line of scrimmage and your wide receivers are going to run wild because the other team is so scared of this amazing running back that you have. There's not really a statistically borne out effect like that in the NFL. A lot of teams have figured out that if you have tremendous road grading offensive linemen, that any running back is going to look a lot better in that system, and that a lot of the success statistically of running backs is somewhat context dependent. I think that people go too far with that. I think it's clear that there are still some special dudes at the running back position in the NFL. Derrick Henry being one of them, absolutely. Jonathan Taylor being one of them, who's been in the news, of course. But even those players run into the problem where their teams think, okay, you've been amazing this last year or this last 2 years or this last 3 years, but we pay for future performance, not past performance. And that's not a bad way to run a team, but I do think it's tragic because running backs, again, are titans of this sport, literally. In Derrick Henry's case, plays for the Titans. They are heroes. They are guys who make this sport fundamentally what it is. And I remember Josh and I had a conversation recently where Josh, you made, I think, the perfect analogy about what's happened with this position, which was, what if when Moneyball came to Major League Baseball, that it had led everyone to the conclusion that home run hitters were no longer valuable. And like the guys who just mashed taters were no longer all that useful in Major League Baseball if they didn't have huge on-base percentages. And, that's not the way that it worked out. Obviously, the numbers in baseball have borne out that home runs, not surprisingly, are very good. But I kind of think of it that way about running backs, where it's a huge bummer that if Sean Alexander came into the NFL today, he'd be viewed as a complimentary piece who might fall out of the league within a few years. Or if pick the favorite running back of your childhood came into the league today, that's how he'd be viewed. I think that's a huge bummer and really a tragedy for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, we can just remember some guy. I mean, we could talk about Red Grange and Jim Brown and, the names and the people and the bodies that the sport was built on. And the game has changed. But I think an important distinction there is that the NFL game has changed. I mean, Alex, you're a college football guy. I think we follow recruiting some. So we know that it's the best kid growing up in Little League plays shortstop. I mean, you play running back if you're the best athlete in high school. I mean, that might be changing a little bit, but I think it still pervades. The running backs in college, whether, they're recent Heisman winners, we can name many of whom went to Alabama and played that position, or, going back through the history of college football, the best and most famous, if you think of guys like, Earl Campbell or, Ricky Williams or Herschel Walker, just the kind of guys when you close your eyes and think of college football, these are the guys. They're famous. They're associated with our childhood memories of the sport. They do take all of the punishment, and so they deserve a huge amount of glory. It's the guy with the ball in any sport also is the most important guy. So the one who has handed the ball, that's an exalted and important position. I don't think we're going to be able to get off of that. And it's funny to kind of chide a franchise or a league for being we only care about winning. But, guys get paid not just because they contribute to winning. They get paid because fans like to see them in that jersey as an avatar of the franchise. Fans like to buy their jersey because they're famous, because they're in commercials. And so you have this kind of disconnect between the guys who are the avatar of a sport and a team, the ones who are famous, the ones who get a lot of glory, but are not paid as much as an offensive lineman who nobody could recognize on the street and never gets the ball. It's just a kind of strange disconnect, Stefan. And it's been interesting to see two things. One, the running backs coming together as a kind of quasi unofficial union in, group chats and Zoom calls, and seeing themselves as having this common cause and trying to kind of sort their way through it. And number two, people like Dave Zirin and others writing about this as a labor issue, connecting it to the SAG-AFTRA, strike and all the and arguing that they should kind of make themselves a part of this larger labor fight. But it all, as Alex said in his very first answer, it all just kind of seems like magical thinking, unless there's a willingness to do just a mass walkout of every running back in the league. But I'm not sure the guys who are drafted in the 6th round have common cause with Austin Eckler and Ezekiel Elliott and Derrick Henry. I mean, what do you make of this kind of Norma Rayification of the bell cow running back?
What's interesting is just the simple fact that they have gotten together collectively to discuss this, because you often don't see athletes commenting on the contracts or failed contract negotiations of their peers. And what I think this might suggest is that the common cause of Saquon Barkley, who talked about sitting out for the season, and Tony Pollard and Josh Jacobs and Austin Eckler and Jamal Williams and Nick Chubb. I mean, these are like all of the NFL's running backs have found unity here. And what I would expect to happen would be for them to exert some pressure on the greater union to take action. Because they're not going to talk owners into doing it. I mean, Saquon Barkley, when he accepted his $10 million offer last week, basically said, I had an epiphany. And the epiphany was that if I don't play, I'm not going to get paid. And if I don't play, they're not going to pay me more next year if I don't play this season.
Alex, last thing before we move on to our next kind of related segment is Jerry Brewer in the Washington Post made an interesting argument. Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs are coming into the league, both selected in the top 12 of the draft, which is unusual for running backs in this era. And he's arguing that maybe they can kind of herald a new era where the irony here is that some of the most valuable players in the league, if you think of a guy like Deebo Samuel, who's a wide receiver who also runs the ball, or, even Christian McCaffrey, who's part of this like running back group that sees themselves as underpaid. But like when he goes to the 49ers, their offense takes off because of his kind of versatility, and that Robinson and Gibbs are both guys who maybe could plausibly argue that they're wide receiver / running backs rather than running backs who catch the ball. And so I'm wondering, does it feel like kind of capitulation for running backs to be like, all right, we'll, get our worth by like not actually doing what this position traditionally does? Or is it just a kind of concession to the modern game? Just like maybe centers were seen in the NBA as being old kind of fossils, but now, Jokic until Jaylen Brown was the highest paid player. And a lot of these guys are the best and most important players in the league because they've changed their games, because they shoot more from the outside. Is it just, you've got to adapt to the changing times?
I think it is just an adaptation to the changing times. But the tough thing about it, and this is something that circles back to the overall problem, is that wide receiver is also a specialized skill. Just like offensive tackle is a specialized skill, just like edge rusher is a specialized skill. And there are very few, verging on maybe 0 NFL running backs in any given year who can actually be as good at being wide receivers as even the second or third best wide receiver on your team. And you hear running backs make this point when they're in contract negotiations. I remember some years ago, Le'Veon Bell, who was the best running back in the NFL for a bit of time with the Pittsburgh Steelers, when he was trying to get a big new contract from the Steelers, argued in part that he should be paid like a wide receiver. I think like a number 2 or number 3 wide receiver was the argument that Le'Veon Bell and his agent made. And obviously that deal didn't come together. He did not stay with the Steelers. He ultimately didn't sign his franchise tag. He signed a big deal with the New York Jets, and that one didn't work out and became another data point for why NFL teams don't like to give big money to running backs. Wide receivers are a really, really hard position, and you do have running backs like Christian McCaffrey and like Deebo Samuel, who is really the only, I would say, true swing man right now in the NFL between those two positions, who can do a bit of both and who can be pretty effective when you flex them out wide and play wide receiver. But that's a really hard position to play. And most of the running backs who say they can be wide receivers can't really be wide receivers. They can be running backs who play a bit of wide out. And those are two very, very different things.
Up next, we'll get into the other end of the financial spectrum, Jaylen Brown and the biggest contract in NBA history.
For a new podcast, might I recommend our podcast?
Hi, I'm Gabe Dunn.
And I'm Allison Raskin. We have a weekly show called Just Between Us, where we explore every kind of topic out there.
From mental health to sexuality to animal behavior to science.
We love to interview fascinating people about their various expertise. We also answer listener questions and play a very silly game called Hypotheticals.
You're not going to want to miss it. It's unhinged.
And if you don't want to trust our word for it because it's our show, you should know that the iHeart Podcast Awards nominated us for Best Ensemble for 2023.
That means that we are good at our jobs.
Or we have good chemistry.
Ooh.
So check out Just Between Us every Wednesday.
At the end of your first year, Discover credit cards automatically double all the cash back you've earned. That's right. Everything you earned doubled. All the cash back from eating at your favorite soup dumpling restaurant doubled. All the cash back from that trip where you sort of learned to snowboard also doubled. And the best part, you don't have to do anything ridiculous to get it. Nope, Discover does it automatically. Seriously though, see terms and check out for yourself at discover.com/match. Last week, Jaylen Brown signed a contract extension with the Boston Celtics that will pay him $303.7 million over 5 years. That's the richest deal in NBA history. Brown, who became eligible for that Supermax contract because he made second-team All-NBA this season, will make $69 million in the last year of his contract, in 2028-2029, by which time he will not have the richest deal in NBA history. But that's a lot of money, although it's not the $772 million that France's Kylian Mbappe has reportedly been dangled to play for a single year in Saudi Arabia, an offer that led LeBron James and Giannis Antetokounmpo to jokingly, or maybe not jokingly, offer to take their own talents to the Middle East. Stefan, these dollar amounts are hard for us or NFL running backs or most anyone else to fathom, although not quite the $6 billion that Josh Harris just paid for the Washington Commanders. We'll have time to get to the bigger picture implication here, but what comes to mind for you when we just start tossing around these extremely large dollar figures?
What comes to mind for me, Josh, is that if the NBA's collective bargaining agreement negotiated between owners and players allows for a 5-year, $300 million contract, two things must be true. One is that the NBA is doing really well financially, and two is that Jaylen Brown would undoubtedly make even more money in an open market. So I actually don't think these numbers are hard to fathom, because among the many positive developments for athletes, for professional athletes in the last 50 years, they're getting paid, and the vast majority of the sentient public understanding the mechanics of their getting paid are kind of 1 and 1A. I Googled Jaylen Brown overpaid, and honestly, there wasn't much. The first two hits were for Zombie Deadspin and The Big Lead, not exactly sports thought leaders. One of the links was a terrible debate segment, and the other posed the question and concluded, Jaylen Brown's not really overpaid. It is a great sign of progress that it takes literally 1 second to demolish the "that guy is overpaid" argument. Here's one example. Former NFL quarterback Boomer Esiason, who probably would not say that he was overpaid when he played, that he did on his radio show with someone named Greg Giannotti.
This is like gross.
Gross? What do you mean? Good for him. That's what I say.
I know, good for him, but it's not like he was. It's not like this man was going to be on the soup kitchen line. He was making a great amount of money. I just don't understand how the second best player on the Celtics and maybe a top 15 player in the NBA, being kind, is the highest paid player in the history of the league?
Alex, Boomer just literally, I said 1 second. It was 1 second. Like, what are you talking about, idiot?
Well, it's a very uninformed genre of sports contract analysis because this happens all the time, guys. The sports leagues are getting richer because the businesses are very successful, because we all watch, and because media companies pay billions of dollars to put these things on TV. And so if you sign a new contract at the right time, and you are one of the handful of best players in the NBA, or you're one of the 10 or 12 or 15 best quarterbacks in the NFL, then congratulations. You're going to sign the richest contract in the history of your sport. It doesn't make it a bad investment. It doesn't mean that the owners have lost their good sense. It doesn't mean that the contract's going to work out poorly for the team that signed it. It just means that you're a pretty good, or in some cases really good player, who's signing a contract at a moment when the league is kind of entering the salad days. And I can't believe that, all of these years after Kirk Cousins signed that huge free agent contract for the Minnesota Vikings, that was the best free agent deal in the history of the NFL, that we are still talking like this, like we don't understand what it takes to be the quote unquote richest contract in any given sport. It's a matter of timing, and it has always been a matter of timing.
I do. Well, first of all, it's interesting. We're all kind of like spaced out evenly in terms of age. Stefan, you kind of came of age during the like advent of free agency.
I literally, Josh, remember the New Year's Eve when the Messersmith decision was handed down.
Yeah,
in baseball.
My first kind of sports fandom started in the 80s, and the term that you would still hear then, and I was Googling it like you were, Stefan, and you never see anymore, is greedy ball players. Even when it was shouted down, I mean, it wasn't a unanimous opinion that free agents were greedy. There was more kind of 50-50 and debate about it, certainly about players, taking big money to go elsewhere and being disloyal. But the term greedy ball players was everywhere. I mean, throughout my childhood, it's just like part of the ambient kind of conversation, and you don't really hear that much anymore. And I think there was obviously the kind of most dissected and talked about moment in like modern sports business history was the decision. So we don't need to rehash it. There was like a kind of brief, I think, re-burbling of conversation around that with LeBron, going to Miami. But the conversation is so different now. I think that stipulating everything that we've already stipulated, I think there are still some interesting things to dig into here. Number one, there is pressure on Jaylen Brown having this tag, even in a more enlightened era. I think the fact that he is not the best player in the NBA or not close to the best player in the NBA, a guy who has clear holes in his game. I mean, people make fun of him for literally not being able to dribble. He's an amazing, amazing player, but not a great, passer. They haven't won a title. I think the thing that's been was tagged on A-Rod or on anybody else who gets a big contract and, disappoints or whatever. I think that pressure is still there. Maybe it's like a vestigial thing that we still haven't gotten rid of, but I think that's still real and exists. The other thing that I would say is that there is something a little bit uneasy, and I'm curious if you guys agree or disagree, that in the era of load management, that whether it comes from the players or probably more likely from the teams, that we're in a moment when players play less than they ever have, star players. And to the extent that guys are getting paid not just per performance, but to entertain, to part of the reason that you get paid is to be on the court. And I think there is an expectation or a hope that if you tune into a game or go to a game, then the best players will be on the court. And so this sort of disaggregation between salary and expectation of appearance or performance, I think that there is, if there isn't already, the NBA, I think, is concerned about that. They've changed the criteria around awards. They have to play in a certain number of games to be eligible. And so I do wonder, Stefan, if there is going to be a conversation, anxiety, anger, annoyance around you're getting paid X and you're not even playing. You're not even showing up, or you're demanding a trade. That's the other thing. You got $60 million, $100 million and you're not happy. I think it would be naive to suggest that we're completely past all of this stuff. And maybe we shouldn't be completely past it. Maybe there should be an expectation that if you sign a contract, then you should play it out, or there should be some expectation that if you're healthy, you take the floor.
But if I'm a fan, I also want to ensure that my team is doing the best thing to win a championship. And if the best thing is that Giannis sits out 5 games or Jaylen Brown doesn't play 8 games.
But isn't some of that just rings culture? Isn't part of being a fan wanting to just watch the players?
It is, but I think teams have ultimately made the calculation that they can weather benching LeBron on the road and disappointing fans in Charlotte versus preserving our best opportunity to win a championship. And I don't know what the threshold, Josh, that you are sort of referring to might be. Like, what's too much? I mean, we're inured to these numbers with professional athletes now in these incredibly lucrative sports like football and baseball and basketball and international football.
I mean, I do think the Mbappe thing, the $772 million, like that is not an amount of money. Like Alex, you were saying, or I can't remember, maybe it was you, Stefan, that like what it suggests is that the league is doing well financially and, you know, there's more money to go around. Like that's not what's happening with the Mbappe contract.
No, it's not. But Alex, haven't we also just processed the fact that Saudi Arabia is an outlier? That this is not the real world? This is not the NBA or the NFL? Saudi Arabia is not going to be implementing a salary cap for its sports teams.
No, and I don't want to tie myself into knots trying to make the case that it's pro-labor as a general concept when the Saudi crown prince decides that, you know, Kylian Mbappe needs 700 mil or something like that.
We got to get Boomer to debate that one. That would be a fun debate.
I think in the non-oligarchical, non-government related, non-influence peddling sporting operations of the world, this is the way it's supposed to work. You know, you are supposed to have a union that makes sure that players as a class get as big a piece of the pie as they possibly can as that pie grows and grows and grows. It's especially growing in the NFL, but it's growing, I think, in every professional sports league because you don't see these salaries getting smaller. And the salary cap in the sports that have it is a function of overall league revenues. This is the way that it's supposed to happen, is you are supposed to have some sort of market guardrails or market boundaries that, you know, you understand both at the top and the bottom, that players as a class need to get at least this much, can't get more than that much. Obviously, a lot of us would prefer if salary caps went away in certain areas, but that's how it's supposed to happen. And then within that, you know, teams can determine if a player is special enough to get the Jaylen Brown contract. And, you know, it seems like in the case of the Celtics and Jaylen Brown, yeah, like what were you going to do? Were you going to not keep this player and let Jason Tatum's prime kind of continue to tick away as you try to find a guy who would replace him and make it likelier that you would win the NBA Finals with somebody other than Jaylen Brown as your second best player? Probably not. And that's also the way it's supposed to work, is that front offices are supposed to make those decisions.
I forgot the other reason that players are often criticized is that in a salary cap world, if a quarterback gets paid a high salary, or if Jaylen Brown gets paid a high salary, the team's not going to be able to afford better players around them. And so there's often the question of, oh, why don't you take less to like sacrifice for the team? Drew Brees was criticized for that with the Saints, for, you know, not reducing his salary to improve the players around him. And so that becomes a kind of dynamic. And there was a piece by Zach Cram in The Ringer that was interesting that said there are guys who have max deals under the previous salary cap, you know, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's, you know, going to be paid around $37 million a year. That's like between the delta between him and Jaylen Brown, that's like $23 million of players that the Thunder will be able to get that the Celtics won't be able to get. And so there's timing there around, this is why Jaylen Brown, who's not a better player than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, is going to get paid so much more. And maybe why the Thunder are going to be set up to put a better team around the guy who's already the better player. That's kind of a complicating factor, Stefan. And I would also disagree with you that Jaylen Brown would make this much in a free market. The max contract is a very strange concept that I think has worked in ways that nobody actually wanted. Like in a free market, LeBron would make $100 million a year. Steph would make $100 million a year. So the max suppresses
maybe
them.
More, yeah.
It suppresses their. But with Jaylen Brown, I'm not sure he would actually make this much. And it becomes like a respect thing, strangely, where players are like, I'm amazing, I should get the max contract. And it's like an insult to not give them a max contract, where if the concept didn't exist, then there wouldn't be anything like that to ask for. There would maybe be more holdouts. There would maybe be more, disagreement, trade demands and everything. It's a weird thing.
Well, but that's built into the function of a collective bargaining agreement that sets maxes and mins. I mean, you look at baseball, and that's a different case study for how players get paid. Players still get paid on the back ends of their careers more than players get paid at the beginning of their careers when their value is the highest. But there is no salary cap, so you don't see the sort of a similar sort of, I guess Jaylen Brown kind of deserves it, and the mechanism is there, therefore we need to exercise it or we'll lose Jaylen Brown, who's good enough. And if you're the Celtics, you're also doing what you just talked about too, Josh, which is looking 3 or 4 years down the road and saying, new TV contract, more revenue, caps is going to go up, Supermax is going to go up, Jaylen Brown is going to actually not be overpaid, quotes, in a few years.
I mentioned this in the running back conversation, Alex, but it's just funny to me how in this more enlightened era where teams just have a better sense of what kind of players contribute to winning, we've gotten away from paying players a lot of money because they're cool and because we like to watch them on TV or pay to go see them. But like the reason that there is this so much money is because of TV deals, because we like to watch players who are cool that are on TV. And I do think that the Shohei Ohtani deal, when it comes in and is going to be $600 million or whatever it is, we have an enormous amount of evidence that even the guy who's maybe the most valuable player in single seasons like ever in the history of the sport, even conceptually it's impossible to be more valuable, does not contribute to winning, or he does contribute to winning, but not to a degree that getting him is like, they've literally never made the playoffs with him. And so you are paying him because he's cool, and like rightly so.
Well, to some extent, I think that we should be careful about how to evaluate Ohtani and also Mike Trout, because you're right that the Angels haven't made the playoffs with him, but it's also pretty clear, as I know the three of us know, that these are incredible players who are on an individual basis, which is all any individual player can be, extremely valuable. But even more interesting, I think, with this Ohtani contract that's going to come in this winter. But the point is,
if you sign LeBron in his prime, you're going to make the finals. Right,
because there's only 5 players on the court in the NBA. It's easier to figure that out.
But the investment in Ohtani, you're not investing in anything that's anything close to guaranteed.
Correct. But the thing that you are investing in, at least off the field, that is close to guaranteed, is that you're going to get significant business return on that. And I think that in a lot of sports contracts, we don't talk about that. The Angels signed Albert Pujols, 11 or 12 years ago now, to a very long contract. He comes over, he's the best hitter in the world. Obviously a surefire Hall of Famer even before he leaves the St. Louis Cardinals to come to the Angels. And the contract on baseball terms, in terms of wins above replacement for dollars spent on this player, was a complete flop. It was one of the worst contracts in MLB history. But was it a bad contract for the Los Angeles Angels as a money-making institution? I'm a lot less sure about that. They don't open their books and tell you. Obviously, it wasn't a bad contract for Pujols. I think a bad contract for Pujols was when he had to work for a couple $100,000 a year at the beginning of his career in St. Louis when he was one of the best hitters in the league. But I think it's important not to lose sight of the point that the Golden State Warriors have made a ton of money off of having Steph Curry in that organization that has nothing to do with exactly how many games they win every year. Every team that's ever employed LeBron James can say the same thing. And there are a lot of NFL, NBA, MLB players for whom I think that's also true, where these things are a business and these teams don't open their entire books the way they do their salary cap books. Like, you can look up how something played against the salary cap. You can't look up did this team run an analysis of how many more tickets they sold, how much more merchandise they sold, how their local media rights valuations might have changed because they had these players. And those things are really important too. And I think that if we got a better look at those, they would point in the direction that it's a really good thing for a business to employ an entertainer like Shohei Ohtani or LeBron James or whoever.
Alex Kirshner is a contributing writer for Slate. He's also one of the hosts of Split Zone Duo, the college football podcast, and you can get tickets to their upcoming show in Minneapolis. It's September 1st, a Friday, and you can get the tickets at splitzonduolive.com. You'd be contributing to the Split Zone Duo collective. Alex, Thanks so much.
Stefan, Josh, great to be with you.
There's a reckoning happening in women's soccer in the U.S.
Tonight, the world of professional women's soccer is turned upside down.
It began with a few brave players who decided to speak out. Their decision forever changed the game. This is their story.
This is about safety in our own lives and our bodies.
The whole system is screwed up.
From Religion of Sports and PRX, I'm Brian Ascuri, and this is Counterattack.
Women's sports are powerful. They deserve respect. They are the future.
Listen now on Amazon Music.
Now it is time for Afterballs, and our sponsor is very upset because I forgot to ID them last week. So with humility and gratitude, I now say we are sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says it was okay. I don't know. I should have done my research. Maybe you can Google it while I talk, Stefan. Did Kenny Sailors play with or battle against Joe Fulks of the Philadelphia Warriors? I mentioned Joe Fulks because on the Wikipedia list of highest paid NBA players by season, we have Steph Curry in 2022-2023 with $48,070,014 as the highest paid player. If you go back past Jordan, Magic, Bird, Ewing, Moses Malone, Bill Walton, Ernie DiGregorio, Bill Russell, you get to Joe Fulks, Philadelphia Warriors, 1946-47, $8,000. That was the equivalent of $113,500 today. And this was, I think, Stefan, it's a good marker of where the NBA was as a league. So Joe Fulks, the highest paid guy making $8,000, the highest Major League Baseball salary that year was $70,000. Hal Newhouser, so almost an order of magnitude more. Joe Fulks is known as Jumping Joe Fulks. He was a forward. He played for the Warriors starting when they were in the BAA, predecessor to the NBA. He was not just the highest paid player. He also set the single game scoring record, according to Wikipedia, 4 different times. Originally, the highest scoring game in the NBA put up by Joe Fulks was 37 points, which is kind of an ordinary weekday now. But when he did finally set his final single game scoring record, it was 63 points, which he set in February of 49. And it was not surpassed until Elgin Baylor scored 64 10 years later. There is this note at the end of his Wikipedia page that notes that he died in March of 1976 when he was killed by his girlfriend's son in an argument over a handgun. So kind of an ignominious end for Jumping Joe Fulks. Stefan, what have you learned?
About Jumping Joe Fulks?
Yeah.
He definitely would have overlapped with Kenny Sailors.
Does he think it was okay?
I'm sure you of that. I'm sure he thought it was okay, too. He may have not. He may have been disappointed that he wasn't asked to endorse Bennett's Prune Juice. We don't know.
All right, Stefan, we're glad to have you back in Afterballing. And I will say this. Stefan, what is your Jumping Joe Fulks, who says it was amazing?
So before I got COVID, I played in Division 2 of the 31-game North American Scrabble Championships held at the hotel in Vegas where Elvis played during his fateful comeback in the 1970s. I had a shitty tournament, which I can't even blame on getting sick because I won 5 of my last 7 games and still finished under 500.
Maybe the people you were playing against had COVID even worse than you did.
Yeah, maybe. Thanks. Appreciate that. Congrats,
I mean,
however,
you were amazing. Great job.
Congrats, however, to Joshua Sokol Rubenstein of Montreal, who won Division 1 for the first time, defeating Joey Malik of Maine in a best-of-5 final, 3-2. I've known Josh for a decade, since I beat him at the 2013 Nationals when I played Goldfish for 92 and Fibranne, Fibranne, a fabric made of spun rayon yarn, for 66. which he challenged. Josh has climbed the ranks since then and has been crushing it the last couple of years. Very deserving champ. Love you, Josh. The event was followed in the same hotel ballroom by the 32-game World Scrabble Championships. The Worlds included 134 players from around 30 countries playing under a British-based international English lexicon that includes like 100,000 more words than the North American dictionary. Z-E-C-H-O-O KY, those are all two-letter words.
CH is a word. I didn't know that.
Yeah, in the international lexicon. Don't try that in North America, Josh. It'll come off the board. Both tournaments were live streamed on Twitch. Anchoring the stream was top 20 player Matt Canick, whom I've known since he was in middle school like 15 years ago. Matt was the Vin Scully and Cal Ripken of Scrabble during these events. From his summer rental apartment in Philadelphia, Matt called 79 games of Scrabble over 2 weeks. Having COVID let me watch the Worlds all day long and guilt-free. I even rallied enough to join Matt on the mic for a few games. Our most exciting game pitted Tatcha Kuriat of Thailand against the 2017 world champ Australian poker player David Eldar. The Thai players are incredible because English is their second language. Thailand was not a British colony. There have been a couple of Thai champs. Anyway, Tatcha used a bright green rack fashioned from Legos. Eldar, meanwhile, kept blocking rack cam with his forearm, giving us a forensic close-up of the fibers in his hoodie. The game came down to the last 2 turns. If Tatcha could spot the word Piscine, P-I-C-I-N-E, on a triple word score, he'd win. Piscine means of the woodpecker family. It's not acceptable in North American Scrabble. It's a tough word to know because it doesn't pluralize. And sure enough, Tatcha missed it, playing Clipe, C-L-I-P-E, another British word meaning to tell tales.
Nope.
Clipe coming down. If David spots Trouter, the game is his.
David held the letters R-R, T-T, and a blank. There was an open O-U on the board. You heard Matt mention trouter, a trout fisherman, also British only. It's a pretty high probability word that David would definitely know.
Double checking his math.
Here it comes.
Oh, no.
Oh.
Oh, no. So David's blown it. Tatcha to go out now with IN beneath Kari, and he'll win the game.
Wow.
Instead of ending the game, David extended who into whorts, W-H-O-R-T-S. A wart is a kind of berry, leaving 2 tiles on his rack, allowing Tatcha to score enough to win. After I noted that even the best players make boneheaded plays, so humanizing, we cut to the players' post-game chatter.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah.
You're gonna try this one? I don't know. I'm afraid you're gonna try. It's good, huh?
Yeah. What the hell? Oh my god.
I don't know what to do. I think about blocking, but you're gonna block me and you have the blank.
Wow, how did I miss that? What the fuck?
I am recounting because I lose by 2. I'm like recounting
Jesus
what.
Christ. Okay, whatever. Let's be done with this. Okay, not my day.
The human drama of athletic competition, and that is why you mic up athletes, Josh. Thank you, Ed Sable.
I think he'll never forget the word trouter now.
He would definitely will not.
When you mentioned Piscine before, I thought you were saying Piscine.
No.
I guess I just had fish on the brain.
No, not fish. Woodpeckers, Josh, woodpeckers. The 445-440 loss left Eldar 3.5 games back, but he won 9 of his last 12, finished second in the field, and qualified for the best-of-7 finals against Harshan Lamabadusuriya, a pediatrician from England who grew up in Sri Lanka. I did not commentate the finals. There were far more qualified people to do that. Sokol Rubinstein, fresh off of his North American title, another former North American champ, Will Anderson, who's been on this podcast, and a former world champ, Wellington Jigere of Nigeria, along with Matt Canik, who plowed through to the end. I am obviously biased, but I swear this was just flat out great sports TV. Back and forth drama, brilliant plays, unforced errors, steady tension, down to the wire action. Harshan won games 1, 3, and 5. David won games 2 and 4, and then came game 6. It was an absolute banger. David opened with protege for 74. Harshan responded with epitaxes, E-P-I-T-A-X-E-S, plural of a word meaning the part of a play in which the main action develops, for 84 points. David exchanged 5 tiles. Harshan played lazed on top of epitaxes for 65. David responded with snifter for 80, hooking the E onto the end of protege to make protege. 2 E's. This is going to be a spicy one. I know that, Matt Canik said. Like the Tatcha-David game, it came down to the final moves. This time, David did not blow it, and in fact made one of the greatest strategic moves under pressure in a high-stakes Scrabble game ever. David eschewed a 47-point play that would have reduced his deficit to just 4 points. He could have played CatCon, C-A-T-C-O-N, short for catalytic converter, also British only, hooking the first C onto hunk to make chunk on a triple word lane. Instead, he played cut, C-U-T, simple, 3-letter word, simultaneously forming ulama, the body of professional theologians in a Muslim country, and taxed for 16 fewer points, a huge sacrifice at the end of a game. But that pressured Harshan into an incredibly complex set of considerations for his next move. His choice allowed David, with the second C that he had saved, to play coding for 50 points in the spot where he had passed up CatCon. Here are Josh, Matt, and Will on the call.
Endgame.
This is winning for David. He's
Yeah,
only up
David's
9
won the game.
points.
David's won the game. Even best in-game sequence from Harshan. He gets outrun. He loses by 11 here. David's got the game.
Wow.
That is incredible.
Wow. This is crazy. David's play of cut, the most incredible play I've seen so far.
Final score, David 471, Harshan 465. David wound up taking game 7, which was also super intense, until the end by a score of 480 to 435 to become only the second player to win multiple World Scrabble Championships. I will definitely, Josh, be posting links to the live stream for these games and encourage everybody to please just humor me and check them out.
I love that he played cut. That's awesome.
And what was crazy, Josh, is that in game 3 of the finals, the other amazing play that David Eldar made was another 3-letter word. He played tan, dropping the T and the N around an A with an R, 2 spaces up. He could have played Ratan, R-A-T-A-N, giving him a place for a bingo, which Harshan didn't spot. Would have been an unbelievable play. It didn't work out in the end, and he lost that game.
Are we sure? Like, was he interviewed afterwards, like, to confirm that he knew he could have played CatCon? Like, what if it was just the only word he knew was cut? He's like, all right, maybe they'll think I'm smart, but I don't actually know any other words.
He only knows the 3s. He had set up CatCon on his rack, and was clearly, thanks to Rack Cam, Josh, it was clear to all of us that he was debating between the 2 options.
All right, final question. How do you pronounce CH?
I don't know. Let's see what it means.
Excuse me.
Hold on.
Clearing my throat.
Sure. Hold on. Let's look at the meaning. There's some weird shit in the British dictionary.
Do you look down on the British dictionary as like...
No, it's actually really cool to watch and play using the British dictionary because there are so many more ways to score. So these games tend to be much more high scoring.
You can play words like cut and tan.
More wide open. And that is the irony of the tournament, the World Championship, coming down to cut and tan. Cha, C-H, a dialect form of I, also C-H-E. It is a pronoun.
So you pronounce it cha.
I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm not saying it a pronunciation. You are fixating on the wrong things here, Josh.
I'm not saying that it's important. I'm just curious. It's not important in a Scrabble context. I just want to know. All right, Stefan, next week I'm expecting a full explanation of the pronunciation of ch or ch. But for now, that is our show. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. To listen to past shows and subscribe or just reach out, go to slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. I'm Josh Levine. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.
If you're looking for a new podcast, might I recommend our podcast?
Hi, I'm Gabe Dunn.
And I'm Allison Raskin. We have a weekly show called Just Between Us, where we explore every kind of topic out there.
From mental health to sexuality to animal behavior to science.
We love to interview fascinating people about their various expertise. We also answer listener questions and play a very silly game called Hypotheticals.
You're not going to want to miss it. It's unhinged.
And if you don't want to trust our word for it because it's our show, you should know that the Podcast Awards nominated us for Best Ensemble for 2023.
That means that we are good at our jobs.
Or we have good chemistry.
Ooh.
So check out Just Between Us every Wednesday.
There's a reckoning happening in women's soccer in the U.S.
Tonight, the world of professional women's soccer is turned upside down.
It began with a few brave players who decided to speak out. Their decision forever changed the game. This is their story.
This is about safety in our own lives and our bodies.
The whole system is screwed up.
From Religion of Sports and PRX, I'm Brian Ascuri, and this is Counterattack.
Women's sports are powerful. They deserve respect. They are the future.
Listen now on Amazon Music.